I'm Ivonne Hammoud, registered social worker and owner of Moon Counselling. But out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Welcome back, everyone, to Outside the Therapy Room. Today, I am joined by one of our team members, Arsh. Arsh, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Ivonne.
Did you want to give us a little introduction? Like, who are you?
Yeah. So, as Ivonne said, my name is Arsh. I am a therapist here at Moon Counselling. In terms of schooling, like I'm technically a social worker, a registered social worker, and have been in the field for about 5 years now. Mm-hmm. I'm a mom, friend, a wife, a daughter, lots of things. And, we're talking about identity today.
Yeah,
so
we are.
All the different parts of, what make me who I am. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, unless we wanted more details.
No, that's great for now. I mean, we're not going to dive deep into who you are, but we are talking about identity today. And identity can be such like a, complicated concept. I think there's a lot of different meanings or views on what identity is. Mm-hmm. What are some of your views of identity? Like when we say identity, what pops up for you?
Like we were kind of saying, right, when we were talking even about this topic, it's a vast one because identity is like such a broad thing. Yeah. Right? And so like to me, the kind of the things that come up right off the top of my head are just identity is something that is made up of many things, not just one. It's several aspects of who we are, and I feel like it's something that evolves and grows and shifts over time. As we grow and as our circumstances change and things like that, I think our identity shifts accordingly. But yeah, I think it's a really vast one, so it'll be interesting to see how this conversation goes today.
It definitely will be interesting. I think like so many people kind of view identity differently as well. Yeah. And I think as you described, like it is such a huge topic that we could definitely break up into smaller ones easily. But just to kind of have like a general meaning of identity. So our identity is formed from our personality traits, our abilities, what we like, what we dislike, our belief system, moral code, and all of these things that motivate us. And a lot of the times too, we might use identity and self-image and they might mean the same thing, or we might mean the same thing. Yeah,
possibly. I mean, I think that's always been something, self-image, self-esteem, identity, like all of those. I feel like
self-worth,
there's big,
all of it. Yeah,
they're very overlapping things, right? It's interesting because one of the things that kind of popped into my head, and maybe I'm taking us on a random tangent here, but we were talking about how like, okay, this is about being outside of the therapy room, and we're not showing up here as therapists, we're showing up here as people. But it's interesting because something I find I struggle with is that like being a therapist and doing this work is such an integral part of who I am. So even when I'm out there in the real world, outside of the therapy room, I can't help but see things through that lens where I try, I'm trying to understand people, somebody's maybe acting out. I'm in a lineup and somebody's being like really, just like rude or frustrated, and I can't help but think like, oh, what must be going on for this person to be behaving this way, and la 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 la. And it's funny because sometimes, right, my friends will just be like, are you psychoanalyzing me? And I'm like, no, I swear, I promise I'm not psychoanalyzing. It's just I can't help but see the world through that lens, because a therapist is not all that I am, but it is a big part of who I am. And there's a reason why I went into this field as well. Right. So that was just something that kind of popped into my head.
No, I love that because I think you're so right. And I get called on that too, especially in movies where there's like the villain that we're supposed to like really dislike. I'm like, oh, poor guy. Like, I wonder what was going on in his childhood or like in his life. Does he have a secure relationship? Like, I just go, and then like my husband or friends will be like, can you just be quiet and watch the damn movie? But no, exactly. It is, I think you're right. Like, and that's an interesting point too, because yes, obviously, like our podcast is called Outside the Therapy Room because we're attempting to not show up as therapists. We're not analyzing or doing all of that. No. But I think our conversations are still very like quote unquote like therapy talk. Yes. Because it is part of our identity. Yeah. That registered social worker or therapist or whatever we want to associate with, or all of them, it is a part of our identity, along with what you mentioned in your introduction. You're also a mom and a friend and a daughter and a wife, and all of those things do form our identities. So our roles and like who our connections and our relationships with other people do have a big impact on our identity.
And I think it makes sense because we're relational creatures, right? Like as humans, relationships are so important. And we learn about ourselves through our relationships, right? Like it's from the time when we're babies, right? Like that's how we form our self-image, is through, a lot of it is through that social lens. So it makes a lot of sense that like a lot of, right? Like I feel like, because it's interesting, the thought that popped up to me was like, a lot of the things I'm talking about identity, like I'm like, they're really like in relation to other people. Yes. And I'm wondering like, why is that? But like, it also makes sense because we are very like relational beings, right? So
you actually like that kind of, had me focus in on some of the questions that we got on social media about identity, and just like some of my own awareness as we were kind of preparing for our chat today. I was thinking a little bit about my own identity and the different kind of shifts and waves that I've kind of gone through in my life, and even like seeing my kiddos too. I think our identity, as you said, is very relational. And so when we're younger, sometimes our identity is formed a lot by the influences from our parents or from the people around us, which primarily are family members or caregivers, like all of that. And so they kind of form our likes and dislikes, right? Like the food that we eat, all of these things, how like the values that are instilled on us, like all of those things kind of form our identity. And then as we start growing up and becoming a little bit more independent, we might begin to form our identity again relationally, but from other like the influence of other people, friends, what we're watching, what is like cool and hip that day.
Which I think like partially comes from us too, though, right? Because like when we're younger, we don't really have a choice over who we're surrounded by, right? And like we've got our family members, and like hopefully everyone's lovely and it's great, and so on. But as we get older, as you're saying, when we gain that independence, what we gravitate towards too, right? Like that there's that our own piece kind of coming through, the people that we choose to form relationships with and things like that. I think there's definitely an influence of our upbringing and things like that, but I think that's right. Like they talk about like teenage years, and we're like, it's all about kind of like gaining that freedom and finding our path and things like that. And I think that's a big part of kind of what you're talking about, and a big part of where that identity starts to become a little bit more our own. But it can take time for a lot of people, right? Especially depending on our upbringing and our culture and those kinds of things.
And again, like I think identity can be so fluid in that way that it can shift and change, and we can come back to something like it just is very fluid in that sense. A question that we had was like about identity. Somebody had mentioned like dating. Sometimes and I think we've seen it. Like remember Brad Pitt and all of the girlfriends that he's had. All of a sudden his like whole fashion sense and like he matches his partner. So this person had asked, like, I find that sometimes my identity can shift depending on who I'm dating and who I'm with. Right. What are your thoughts on that? Because it is relational. There is an impact from other people. So how, like what's your view?
I guess like I have about 100 thoughts.
I know.
And like I'm trying to sift through them all. I mean, right, it's hard to say based on just that, right?
Yeah.
Because like I think what is like kind of typical for one person isn't necessarily for another, and right? But I think generally what I kind of sense is that like I think to an extent, like if we think about it, like I don't act the same way with my mom as I do with my friends, as I do with like, you know, my partner. Like I'm still me. Yeah. But like there's a slight shift in how I you know, show up, right? Like I'm, you know, there's a part of me showing up at work. There's a part of me showing up with my friends. There's a part of me showing up with my family. And so like, I think to an extent, it kind of makes sense that like our, you know, how we're kind of showing up is maybe changing based on the people, like, you know, even in our dating relationships and things like that. I think sometimes, you know, like if we are really struggling with our sense of self though, then those influences maybe can be stronger, right? Like we are struggling to figure out kind of who we are. And so sometimes we can kind of become like a mirror too, right? Like, and that's a little bit of a personal thing for me. Like growing up, I really struggled with my identity. And I think it's why I signed up for this topic, because I was like, this is an interesting one for me, because I'm somebody who really struggled with my identity, and I'm 31 now, and I'm kind of starting to figure out what that means for me and who am I truly within myself. Like, and I think like, you know, I think so I kind of struggled with that sense of like, I really struggled with my sense of self. So I really took on like just the characteristics of my friends and kind of put on this like face that matched the room kind of thing, because I really struggled to be in touch with myself. So I don't know if that's the case here, or it's just a natural, like, right, to some extent we all do kind of show up a little differently in different relationships. I think it really just depends on the person, but that's kind of what came up for me.
Yeah, I like the mirroring that you said, because naturally we mirror people, and sometimes it isn't based on our identity. It's just something that we naturally, I think we learn about it in school, like mirroring a client. Sometimes we cross our legs and they're all of a sudden crossing their legs, or they're sitting a certain way and we're sitting a certain way. So this mirroring kind of happens to create
social connection. It's a way to connect.
Definitely. It is a way to connect, to like kind of build that security and that safety and that conversation, which I would say is separate than like the identity piece and absorbing, you know, how someone's speaking, or what their interests and their likes and dislikes are. All of those things that again go outside us. For some reason, something that's coming up for me is Mean Girls. Like Katie just kind of leaves some of the things that were really important to her to kind of fit into this group.
That's a big part.
And that can, again, it obviously at the end of the movie has changed her identity in some way, but she was able to kind of absorb both of her previous and her new present and kind of create who she is,
versus completely abandoning who she was to be totally reform herself into something new. She was able to find a way to take this thing that also maybe resonated with her, but not completely abandon who she was either, and bring a piece of herself into that and kind of make it her own. And I think a lot of the values, moral code, like our belief system, a lot of that is like intertwined within our identity and can again be changed depending, like again there's the fluidity. If we grow up in a family where there are these belief systems or these values, we might grow up to not really fully associate with those, and that again can be either our own independence and our own learning and our own education to kind of change some of those things to fit our own identity at that place. Absolutely. I totally agree there. Like as we're kind of talking about this, I know there's like we're potentially maybe going to be doing this as a topic later, so I won't speak too much on it, but like I do think an important thing to mention here, like with identity, is the idea, right, like sometimes like folks who are neurodivergent, who don't quite like, you know, fit in with like the typical norms and the typical standards, a lot of times they're kind of forced to mirror and mask and take on those kind of, and
like safety, security.
For safety, exactly, right? To be able to fit in order to be safe. A lot of masking is happening, and a lot of disconnecting from our authentic self to kind of find that safety in our society that maybe isn't necessarily quite designed. And like that's kind of where a lot of my struggles kind of came from. And so like I think that's definitely an important piece to talk, like to just mention. And I think like, right, race, like gender, like, you know, our like sexual orientation, all of those pieces, I think, right, because that's why they're such significant parts of our identity. And that's why, right, like that safety in our society and in our environments is so important, so that people don't feel the need to have to disconnect from their authentic selves to try and like fit in and be safe, right? So just like a little
no, thank you. I think that's an important thing to also recognize, that sometimes the masking, the mirroring, all of those things happen, which, you know, in those environments, we might disconnect from our sense of self, but we still know who we are. We still have a strong sense of identity. It's just more so out of like necessity at times, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes out of safety, sometimes out of necessity. And I think like, you know, for some people, it can be one of those things where like internally you know who you are, but you're kind of having to present a certain way. And I think for other people, right, if you've sort of had to mask and just sort of fit in your whole life since you were a kid, you never really actually learn to tap into yourself or touch in or connect with that authentic self. And then, you know, you're like me in your 30s, it's like trying to figure it all out for yourself and be like, oh, okay, like I'm realizing what feels good for me and what doesn't. And like it can be a new experience to kind of like really tap into like that individual kind of identity, which again, like we said, is formed relationally, but you kind of get to kind of figure out like how you want to relate with it, right? How you want to relate with it can shift over time. But anyway, I'm going on tangents.
Oh my God, I love your tangents. But also I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think like you're helping people feel less alone, because I think a lot of people around those big ages, like 30s or 40s or even 20s, can have a moment where they're kind of, you know, questioning identity, or we hear all the time like identity crisis, midlife crisis, quarter life crisis is a thing now, where there is kind of this, you know, opportunity. There's like kind of a deadline, a birthday coming up, a big one that can just kind of have us reflect a little bit on like where we are in life, what is going on in our lives, who we are, and that can kind of cause this challenge in our identity, or at least maybe question or check in on our identity a little bit. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. We did have that as one of those questions too, like turning 30 was really scary. Now as I'm approaching 40, I'm feeling worried about it. And I think a lot of that, like with those big ages, it's also like, where's my identity? Where am I in life in comparison to what society, or the bunny quotes, like society or my family or the people around me expect me to be?
Absolutely.
And that can also hold a strong challenge, because deeply it may be what we want, but we just haven't been able to have the opportunity to obtain it just yet. So whether that be career, relationship, family, children, like a home, all whatever, like traveling experiences, whatever it could be, if we don't have that by a certain time, and that is what we feel is expected of us, that can be really challenging.
Exactly. Like I feel like expectations really impact our identity too, right? Like it's like whether we're kind of trying to fit our identity into those expectations, or we're feeling burdened by the expectations, or what it might be. But like you're absolutely right. Like I think whether it's societal expectations or maybe closer to home, like family members, friends, or things like that, but those expectations can really make us kind of be at war with our identity and what we want and what we need, and so absolutely, that makes a lot of sense.
Like it brings up a lot of questions, and like then we can reflect on our identity and see, but it can definitely be hard, and we've been talking about like entering different stages, but also leaving stages can be really difficult. Like somebody has also mentioned ending a long-term relationship, a divorce, like all of these things can have a huge impact on your identity as well.
Yeah.
Like, right?
Absolutely. It's like, it's grieving, right? Like, not only are you grieving perhaps that relationship, that person, and that loss, but like, you're also kind of grieving the loss of that part of your identity, right? And like that's really impactful. So absolutely.
And like the shift of roles, like I was a wife, now I'm an ex-wife. Like, you know, like I was a single person and now I'm a mother. Like all of these different roles and the like titles that we get to those roles, like that can be a lot. And I think even like, just if we can bring up motherhood for a moment, that is a really strong, I don't know about you, but even like it at work with clients, or even in my personal life, and even just myself, when I became a mom, there is a lot of that shifting. Like, I'm literally the person that needs to keep this little human alive, and we can be so absorbed by, you know, keeping this cute little thing alive that we lose our sense of self. We, again, I don't know about you, but my anxiety definitely increased when I had a baby. I was way more aware of all of these dangers and like how I was going to take care of my kiddo, and it's still there now that my kiddos are a little older. But it is kind of like that shift of focus.
Absolutely.
Right? Like where I was a very social person and bubbly and always wanting to be at social events. Now suddenly I don't want to go out anymore, and I want to stay home and I want to do all of these things. And it can be a moment that we check in with ourselves or with our friends and just be like, hey, you are a mom, but you're also you. How can we bring that version of you? It may look a little differently now. But how can we have you kind of come back to who you are and what makes you you?
Coming back to Mean Girls, right? Like not abandoning ourselves entirely and finding a way to bring those two pieces together, right? Like I can totally relate with you, because it's so funny, because in the moment, like I definitely noticed, I'm pretty sure I had like postpartum anxiety or something, because I definitely noticed how intense my anxiety was. But, you know, like even separate from that, I remember like, it was probably like 5 or 6 months in, or maybe actually even like a year after, even after a year after my daughter was born. And I remember looking back, and I remember like, I was like, wow, like I was in a literal bubble for like the first 4 to 5 months of, and like, and I didn't even notice, like in it, I didn't notice. It was like when I had started to come back out and started to kind of be me again and do my things again and la 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 la, that's when I like looked back and was like, oh my god, like I was like utterly unaware of anything in the world other than my little baby, because I was like so anxious, right? And so and I think like, right, like it can be scary, and I think it's important that we have people in our lives that can help us kind of check in and make sure that we're doing okay. And like, you know, like my partner was amazing. I had great friends. You know, I had my friend who lives right across from me, and they were awesome, like kind of checking in with me and things like that. But it was like, I think those things help, right? Those things can help us bring us back to ourselves. And I do think to an extent, like, right, like I think some of it I feel like even biologically, like I think it's meant to be that way a little bit sometimes, right?
Sometimes,
like sometimes it's like maybe not to that extent, but I think like in the beginning stages, like the focus kind of, you know, being on your baby can like it's like kind of like this thing where you're like in this like protective mode, and I think it can be so scary, right, for moms who sometimes feel that disconnect too, and like don't feel that. But like I feel like in terms of identity as a whole, there's like again those ebbs and flows, right? Having a baby, big life change, identity's probably going to shift a little bit, and as we settle into that role, our identity is probably going to shift as we go along too.
I love like the settling into that role, like that adjustment period, like. And that is, yes, when you become a mother, when you shift careers, when you know, are going through a breakup or entering a new relationship, like there is that adjustment phase that we might fully be consumed by this new thing.
Exactly.
And it's not until we kind of are at that place where we're feeling comfortable in that new environment or in that new role that we might be able to then like kind of get back in touch with ourselves, right?
Yes,
and
exactly.
Like, so it does kind of like ebb and flow, and I think that's something that's important for us to normalize and validate for people, because yes, if you're experiencing an identity challenge or crisis, whatever you want to call it, it's not permanent and forever. It is a moment that allows you to reflect a little bit on where you're at and can move back towards a version of where you want it to be. Again, like there's always going to be like additional things that kind of come up, or new things that we learned that then form our like new kind of identity. Yeah. But it is. Have you seen Inside Out?
I haven't seen the second one.
Oh my god.
I want to watch it.
It's so good. But in that, there's an example too of like identity shifting at the end. I won't spoil it for you.
Okay.
But like there is like, it's constantly shifting when we're teens.
Oh yeah.
And we're suddenly interested in like crushes or in other people. Like that can also have an impact on our identity as well.
Yeah. I think, I really do think identity is something that's quite unfathomable. You know, like, because I think like every day, like we're adding to it, we're shifting it, it's evolving every single day, because like we aren't static creatures, right? Like,
and that's like the fluidity
of it. Exactly. It's a fluid thing that is constantly growing and shifting and changing form, and like, you know, with like big spikes at times, often gradually growing and shifting, and then, you know, we have big life things that happen, and then there's bigger spikes and things like that. But I do think it's this like shifting thing, right?
Yeah, I do. I'm looking at the questions here again, and it's like, how does one form their identity? I think we talked a little bit about that already. Can you change your identity? Well, that's the fluidity you just talked about. What can impact identity? I think like everything. Everything, but it's also personal to each person of like what actually penetrates into this is something that now I feel really connected to, or that is part of my value. So there's a lot of,
that's why we all have different values, different interests, different things, right? Like it's the, like, no singular thing is unique to us, but it's the combination of all the things that, you know, that make us unique, right? And so I think that, you know, absolutely, there's so many things that can impact us, and I think our childhood does play a big role in that, though, I do believe, right? Like, this is right where my therapist brain comes in, but like, you know, like they say, like, you know, 90% of our brain is like formed by the time we're 5 years old, which is wild if you think about it, right? Not to say, but here's, even the brain is constantly shifting and evolving. Like, how cool is that? This is my neuro nerd comes out when I talk about brains, because they're so cool. Like, our brain is constantly making new pathways, shifting, like, you know, it's, you know, new neural path connections and things like that. And so, like, yes, by 5, like 90% of our brain is formed, which is really important, because that's the foundation of our brain for the rest of our life. But it goes through massive shifts and changes, like throughout our lifetime. Adolescence is another critical period. So like, even if you look at it from like a neurological perspective, if you looked at identity through that lens, like even our brain is constantly evolving and shifting based on our experiences, right? So that just a cool little another random tangent.
Oh my gosh. Like I said, love your random tangents. But yeah, like you're right. Like literally all of us is constantly changing. Our brains, obviously a huge network that runs our bodies, our feelings, our emotions, like all of these things are constantly changing. And so I think it is like, you know, just if people want to be a little bit more reflexive, reflective, both. If somebody does want to reflect a little bit further on their identity, they can identify like, what are my values? What are things that make me happy? What are things that bring me joy? What are connections that are important to me? Is there any other questions that you would add into like someone reflecting on their identity?
A big one for me is always like, what are the things that make me feel safe, right? What are the things that and what does safety feel like in my body? Like what makes me feel genuinely safe and calm, and like what are those things? Because right, like we've all had hard life experiences and tough things have happened to us, which also impact our identity.
For sure.
Right?
They do.
And I think a big one is really learning and understanding what are the things that make us feel safe, right?
I think also, sorry to cut you off for a second. I think, yes, like does your body feel safety, but what does safety mean to you? Exactly. Because for someone it can be, you know, like I have a roof over my head and that to me is safety, but relationally with someone else that may feel or mean something different.
Absolutely. Exactly. Right. Like I think that's really like sometimes like just something that popped into my head was like sometimes we can cling on to certain things for safety too, right? Like because like and like but what kind of safety are we talking about, right? Like is this like a you know, there's a difference in I feel threatened and so I'm clinging on to this for safety versus like genuine actual safety where I feel like I can breathe, I can relax, and I am okay. Right? And so like I think sometimes identity can get crossed over there too, where like sometimes people can hold on to certain things very, very strongly because they're incredibly strong beliefs for whatever reason, right? Like those are things that have kept them safe. And so now, even though their circumstances may have changed, but we still hold on to these things that once kept us safe, right? And so really kind of like reflecting on, okay, like the things that I'm holding on to, are they things that, you know, are still serving me? Are they things that are still actually helping me, making me feel safe? And what does safety feel like in my body, right? I think those are some important things to recognize, right? Like, because what is a defense mechanism and something that you know we're holding on to for just to keep ourselves safe, and what's actually our identity? Sometimes those things are different.
Yeah, you're completely right. And it's again identifying those things and seeing, you know, like when you said like an object of security, I thought like a safety blanket. Like so many people when their kids have a safety blanket to sleep and it keeps them safe, like all of these things. And that's the emotional safety and the physical safety of like not realistic things, like your dreams or a ghost under the bed. Like I'm again thinking like kiddos, but like that safety and security blanket. And again, when you grow up, there may be some defense mechanisms, but you're completely right in that trying to be able to identify the differences between our identity and how we feel safety and the devices that we use for protection.
Yes, absolutely. You summarized that really well.
Thank you. But yeah, so those are again some questions that you can reflect on to kind of like identify that. And I think, as like I was mentioning, like kiddos, I think another question to ask yourself is this something that makes me happy, or am I doing it because other people around me feel happy when I do that? And I think that again, there's so many movies out there of like, my parents want me to be a hockey player, or my parents want me to be a doctor, and they're like, oh, no, I want like High School Musical. Like, I'm gonna be the basketball player because my dad wants me to, but I like singing. Like, you know, there is like that identity that can be impacted. Like we talked about the impact that our parents have on that, but also their openness to meeting us where we're at when we are developing these different senses of self. And being able to have that acceptance from a parent or a caretaker to be like, you like music and basketball? That's great.
All right.
Let's do both. But right, like there can be such that strong impact on how other people feel based on you. And again, like that can change and that can vary depending on someone's upbringing. And I'm thinking too for individuals who don't feel safe coming out to their parents because of their strong beliefs and values and the challenge that some of those individuals can have with accepting themselves and their identity because of the strong space that kind of like the jar that held all of those beliefs and stuff, and now trying to get out of that. Like that can be huge.
Very huge. Absolutely. Like that's a big part of it, right? Like we said, like, I mean, as kids, like our connection to our parents and caregivers it's how we survive. Like, right? It's like it's innate and inborn in us to have that attachment and that connection. And sometimes, like oftentimes, right, like growing up, because we have less power as kids, we often have to kind of forego our authenticity for the connection and the attachment.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
As we get older and we have more power, right? And we don't necessarily, and that independence, exactly. We don't necessarily like need that attachment to survive per se, right? We start to recognize the importance of authenticity because it right? We need both attachment and authenticity. They're both biological needs that we have. And I think a big part of becoming an adult and getting older and coming into that is finding, like, how do you find a way to honor both of those? Right? I think that's like a big part of it. Not abandoning one for the other, for example, right? And that goes the other way too. Like attachments and relationships and connections are also important. And so how do we find that balance between our, you know, how do we find the people who allow us to be who we are and also will form those connections with us in a safe way?
Yeah. And I think with that, there's also like vulnerability.
Yes.
Like being vulnerable enough to honor yourself, because it's naturally going to attract people who will like enjoy your authentic self versus like sometimes we hide. And again, that's a protective factor, right? Like we're protecting ourselves. We're morphing into the person we think these people want us to be. Yeah. And again, that can then cause that conflict within our identity or like a little bit of like that nudging, because we're like, are we being true to ourselves? No, but this feels good to be accepted by all of these people.
Exactly.
Or we talk like, again, Mean Girls coming up here. Yeah. Katie Heron. Like she too was like trying to figure out between those two friend groups, ones that honored that honored and accepted her as who she was, and the other one that didn't, and she morphed herself into that in a way, right? So it is kind of like, it can be so complex. We're going into way more complex issues here, but like it can definitely be.
Can it be that our therapist sides are coming out a little bit?
Sure. That is part of our identity after all. It's definitely popping in.
Exactly.
I think we kind of touched on all of the questions that people had.
Okay.
Like midlife quarter crisis, we're hearing a lot more, on social media, like TikTok, all of those places, we're seeing a lot more like quarter life crisis. And there's obviously an impact too on society, our environment, our geography, where we're at, how expensive things are, that we may feel like, I think there was research that people are deciding to have children later in life, whereas like way back when it was much earlier. And so those things, those changes that happen within our society and our, like the time that we're in, all of these things can also have an impact on our identity.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. One question that kind of stood out to me, I don't know if we fully touched on it. It says, is that okay? So it's like, what really is a midlife or quarter life crisis? We kind of talked about that, and then the person mentioned people say they experienced it. People say they experience it, but I haven't. And so like I know we're talking a bit of like the crises and things like that, but that also looks different for everybody, right? Like not everybody has to experience that, and I think, you know, our life experiences are going to impact whether we're gonna have this like sudden big moment where we're gonna have this like huge crisis, or maybe we've just been figuring out our identity the whole way through and all the way along, right? Like everybody's experience is kind of different. I would say, like, even for me, like in a lot of ways, I do think I was kind of discovering my identity all the way through, but I had a lot of like, you know, my own therapy to do and other work to do that like made it really hard for me to kind of be aware of what was going on for me internally. And so as I started to get that therapy, I started to become more aware of what was going on. And like it can seem like there was like this sudden shift and change, but it was happening all along. I just wasn't quite aware of it, right? And so like I think everybody's like crisis or midlife crisis or quarter life crisis, like I think it looks different for everybody. And it, you know, I think it's completely natural and normal for us to have this big sudden realization, or maybe it's a very quiet one, or it's never really a crisis at all. Right? Like it really just depends on our life experiences, who we are, our relationships, so many factors.
There's a lot of factors for sure that can impact that. I think too, like that can be an example of maybe having a strong sense of self, like you said, right?
Yeah.
Like you've kind of gone through this stage, and I have too, where there were like different moments in my life that I'm like, oop, need to do a quick check-in, but they weren't like, you know,
drastic.
This big drastic thing that happened that caused that. And so I think the absence of a midlife, quarter life crisis may be a strong sense of self, but it may also be like exactly like you said, experiences, like what's going on in your life at that time, the people that are around you, are they supportive of who you are, or are they challenging you to become something, a version of themselves, or a version of you that they want. Or that they will be able to like obtain things from. So like all of those things obviously vary and cause these crises to happen.
Absolutely.
The other thing I thought of, because a lot of the time when we hear midlife crisis, we imagine like an old man buying like a brand new car.
Like a convertible.
With like a young girlfriend. Like, I'm sorry that like we're stereotyping, but that is like what pops up.
Because that's like that's what media kind of shoves in your face.
Definitely shoved in our faces for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think too, in those experiences, if we go with that, it's the lack of acceptance of where your life is at. Because sometimes like those quarter life crises at 50s, it's like, shit, I'm getting old. I don't want to lose my young self. I don't want to lose my identity. And so we can kind of externally revert to these things that make us feel younger, make us feel more in tune with the identity that we don't want to lose.
Exactly. Or perhaps it was an identity we never got to explore when we were younger. And now we're realizing we're getting older and we're trying to do these things that we realize, like, what was I doing with my life? I didn't do any of the things I wanted to do. And so suddenly, like, it hits us like a truck, and you know, we're buying red Ferraris.
I mean, wouldn't that be nice? But,
I know. We're stereotyping,
guys. But like definitely all of those things for sure. And I love actually that you said that, because so many times I have heard, again, in various different places within my roles, I have heard people say like, I didn't get my fun college years, or I didn't get my fun university years because I was like in this relationship, I was really focused on my program. And it's not until later when that people are able to reflect back and be like, I was able to accomplish all of these wonderful things, and that's great, but I missed that part of like this stage, or what's like commonly mentioned, like right, like so definitely then that can be like a quick shift externally into like our behavior that can be confusing for the people around us to all of a sudden do that, but internally for ourselves we can reflect and have some understanding as to why we may suddenly be having this drastic change.
What's going on, right? Because the more we can actually understand where this is coming from, then whatever we're trying to do, we can do it in a more sustainable way, right? We can do it in a way that's more conducive to who we truly are, and not, it's less of a reaction and more of an action of like, okay, like, I'm realizing that these are things I never got to do, and I want to experience them. So how do I do this in a way that, you know, doesn't make me abandon what I have created and built, right? Or maybe at least just give me time to reflect on it, because maybe sometimes, right, the part of the identity is realizing that maybe some of these things that I've built and done, like, are not things I actually really want, right? But like, giving ourselves time to reflect and take action was just reacting can right, allow us to not have those maybe regrets and things like that later on, right? So
no, I love that, and that's so true. Just having like a moment of pause and check in.
I always say, like, whenever things are happening really fast, or we're reacting really quickly, it's a moment to pause. It's a moment to take a breath, to reflect, to slow down and notice what's going on for us and where this is kind of coming from, because right, like, those reactions, those triggers or so on, right, like, they're usually triggering something that maybe we're not quite aware of. And so just taking a moment to pause, it's way easier said than done. For sure. Way easier said than done. But just
even having the awareness of those cues. Right? Like, I'm reacting right now. Maybe I need to pause, or I need to come back to this at a later point, or giving ourselves permission to do that.
And a lot of times it happens after the fact.
Oh, for sure.
I already reacted. Now I can be like, okay, damn. That was quite the reaction.
Like, maybe what was that about? It? What part of me was like speaking up at that point? Yeah. But it even then, even if it happens late, still do it.
Exactly.
Still have that moment to check in and give yourself permission to change your decision, your opinion, the thing that you did, cancel those tickets wherever. Like, if, again, I mean, depending on the ticket.
I mean, or you give me,
or you can give them away. But like, like just giving yourself that chance to go back, just because you already did it doesn't mean that it can't be changed.
Exactly.
Obviously, as we've talked about this, we've definitely talked a lot about our childhood and that having a big impact. And I just wanted to kind of like, finish off with a note on how, if you have kiddos in your life, how can you encourage them to build their identity? So I thought, why don't we spend a few minutes on that? Because I think, again, we can be so like stuck in what's happening in our household when we're kids, and that's all that we kind of see and are aware of, and that, like we've already pointed out, can have a huge impact on our values, our morals, what we know to exist, to be true. And so I think one thing that can be helpful is definitely giving our kiddos the opportunity to explore, to learn different cultures, different religions, different foods, different people, different like all of these things, just so that it's there and it's visible, even if it's not happening in your household.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, right, like expanding your horizons a little bit, right? And that gives opportunity, because some things will hit, some things won't.
Exactly.
But without the opportunity to know what's out there and see and experience it, they'll, right, like you don't know
you don't
what's
know what
gonna
you don't
hit.
know.
Exactly.
Right?
You don't know what you don't know. So like, absolutely, like I think, like, providing opportunity for those experiences. One thing for me is also like, this is something like my husband is so good at it. I have to work on it.
Yeah.
And I do, of letting, like, not constantly rushing in when my kid's doing something, right?
Oh, that's so hard for me too.
I know.
I'm like, careful, Liz.
I know. And I'm just like, okay, stop it. She's fine. She's okay. Obviously, make sure everything's safe, right? But like, I think sometimes, right, like what people think is safe and what others think is safe can be like different, right? Like, as long as she's not gonna like really hurt herself, it's okay for her to try it on her own. And sometimes it's our own sense of urgency, or maybe we're doing this or doing that and we're running late and la la la. So I really do try to do my best to give my daughter like time to figure things out on her own. Put her shoes on by herself, put her clothes on by herself. Oh, I'm sitting there like biting my fist, like, oh my God,
that was this morning,
girl, like but I'm like, no, like, this is my own issue. Like, I need to like, right, like sit back and let her figure it out, right? Like, because identity, I know it seems like such a tiny thing, but it's so connected. Like, we need to let our kids do things for themselves and figure things out. It builds themselves and fail.
We need to give our kids permission to fail, because there's so many lessons that can happen from that. And as a parent, you don't want your kid to be upset. You don't want your kid to fail or to be, hurt, because
our own stuff's coming in there.
Right? Exactly. And we're like, oh no, my poor baby, like just failed at this thing. But it can honestly create such an opportunity of learning and change.
I notice in Reva, like, she really doesn't, she'll keep trying.
Yeah.
Like, she honestly, like, like, I've noticed the more I've kind of like allowed her to kind of figure it out. Yes, of course, there are times where she will get frustrated.
Oh yeah.
And it also helps her learn to ask for help. Yeah. Right? Like, she asks for help when she needs
regulate emotions. The frustration might not help. So my son Zane is in golf, and his golf instructor always says, like, if you're frustrated, you need to take a breath, because you're not going to be able to perform your best ability if you're only acting with frustration.
Yes.
And it is like giving the kiddos an opportunity to fail teaches them what they could have done differently, teaches them problem solving, teaches them when to ask for help.
Exactly.
All of these amazing things that do help to build their identity, but also their oh shoot, I lost the word. Their confidence. Yes. That's the word. Like, their confidence and their capability, like all of these amazing things that are going to serve them good from a young age into their adulthood.
Exactly. Yeah. Because by not rushing in, we're showing our kids that we have faith, we trust in them to figure it out, and that they're able to figure it out. Right. And if they're not, then it's okay. And that we're there to help. Right.
There's going to be people to help. I think another thing with like giving our kiddos an opportunity to explore And like, as you said, like something I think we both struggle with is like that safety. We want to keep our kiddos safe, but it also, like, there was this big, huge thing about like, don't talk to strangers. Yes, don't talk to strangers. But there are like a random person walking by me when I'm dropping them off. They're like, oh, good morning. And I'm like, oh, morning.
Yeah.
And that's okay. It's okay to be friendly. It's okay to say hello. So there is, again, like that, you know, like I don't know, I guess we're having to give them the opportunity to learn and connect with other people in a way that is still keeping them safe and secure, and still allowing them to engage in those fun conversations with a lady on the bus or while you're sitting in the movie theater, like wherever these opportunities are, just to get to meet people at different life stages, different experiences. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, exactly. Then you're close by. You're there, right? Like you're there to support them when they genuinely, if and when they genuinely truly need it. You're there, right? It's like, oh, like animals, like, you know, they'll stay there, but their young will go out and explore, but the parents always close by, right? But they don't intervene, right? Like they kind of let them kind of do their thing, and yeah, like it like you said, it develops all of those things: identity, self-esteem, confidence, all of those things, and you know, being okay to fail, because by practicing and failing and trying again and learning, and that's how we get better.
And I think a big thing too is like encouraging them to use their voice, ask for help. Like say no if someone's like making you feel uncomfortable. Come to me, tell it, like just being able to use their voice so that they can be loud, so that they can, you know, use it to defend, protect themselves, or speak up on something that they don't feel comfortable with. All of these wonderful things, like, and it's obviously, when your kiddo's talking back to you, it can be like, damn it, not to me. Not right now. Come on. Wow. But it is like, how can we encourage them to do that? Exactly.
And my thing with my daughter too, it's like, okay, like I will kind of try to work on her. I would kind of try to work with her, on how to perhaps say things in a more polite way. Because that girl will let you know when she's done and she doesn't want your attention. Like she will really let you know. And so like working on ways to sort of like, you know, be, you know, I think that's fair to kind of work on those things, but not to silence them. Right? Exactly. Like allow them to have their voice. And you can support them in perhaps maybe, you know, wording things a little bit better over time as they get older, as it becomes more developmentally appropriate.
Or like recognizing tone, like all of those things are things that you can teach and support and not silence. Right?
Exactly.
So I mean, we're gonna kind of just like end it on there with like tools that you can practice yourself, because I think all of the things we said can definitely be applied to ourselves. But also to kiddos or to other people in your life, and also like some of the reflection questions that we gave. If you're struggling with your identity, like again, you know, there's a lot of things that we mentioned. I think another thing's like, what are my strengths? What brings me happiness? What are my values? All of those wonderful reflection questions, just to help us learn a little bit more about where we're at with our identity.
Absolutely.
Is there any last thoughts you want to add?
No, this was lovely. This is a lovely chat. And we hope you all got something out of it, right? Different people will get different things, but it was my pleasure being here.
Thank you so much, Arsh, and thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.